Hey, this is Mansab, and you're listening to Simply Wild. You know, I always been that guy, the one who loves a good story. I started as a writer, then became a wildlife researcher, and out there in the field seeing incredible things, I realized something. So many amazing stories, especially from wildlife, history, and nature, they get locked up. So that's why this podcast exists. Here, history gets wild, and the wild gets a history. What happens when millions of birds vanish from the sky? Not slowly, but in just few years. A disappearance so total, so silent, it pushed entire ecosystem to the brink and left scientists baffled. Today, we investigate one of the most dramatic ecological mysteries of our time. Namaste, Adab, and a very warm welcome. You are here for Simply Wild. And today's story, it's a real life ecological horde unit. A story that begins in the skies of 1990 India with a silent empty space where there used to be thousands of wings. We are talking about the Great Indian Vulture Crisis. Now let's be honest, vultures, they have a bit of a PR problem. They are not as majestic as tiger or as cute as red pandas. We often see them as scavengers, associate them with death. But in the Indian ecosystem, for centuries, vultures were not just important, they were absolutely essential. Think of them as nature's most efficient, most vital cleanup crew. Millions of them, species like white-rumped vulture, the Indian vulture, the slender-billed vulture, soared over the subcontinent. Their job? Very simple, to dispose of an animal carcasses, especially cattle. With India's huge livestock population and the cultural sensitivity around the cattle, vultures performed a critical sanitation service for free. They could strip a carcass clean in minutes, preventing the spread of disease and keeping the environment clean. They were so common that seeing a kettle of vultures circling in the sky was a normal part of the Indian landscape. They even held a sacred role for the Parsi community, facilitating their sky burials at the Towers of Silence. They were the unsung, unassuming, and incredibly effective guardians of ecological balance. For thousands of years, this system worked perfectly. Vultures were everywhere, doing their crucial job. But then in the 1990s, something went terrifyingly wrong. The kings of the sky began to disappear. Not just few, but millions. What was causing the Great Vanishing Act? That's coming up next. Now, this wasn't a slow decline, it was a catastrophic crash. Scientists and bird watchers on the ground started raising the alarm. Places that once teemed with thousands of vultures now had just handful or none at all. The numbers were staggering. Between the early 90s and early 2000s, the population of some of the most common vulture species dropped by more than 99%. 99%, let that sink in. It was an ecological mystery on a massive scale. The race was on to find the culprit, and it was a true horde unit. The initial suspects were the usual ones. Was it a new deadly avian disease like a bird flu wiping them out? Scientists tested for viruses. Nothing conclusive. Was it pesticides? The widespread use of chemicals in agriculture had harmed birds of prey before. Researchers looked, but they couldn't find a direct link that explained the sheer speed and the scale of this crash. Was it habitat loss? While a problem, it couldn't explain why millions of vultures were vanishing so quickly across such a vast area. Every theory led to a dead end. Meanwhile, the skies grew emptier and quieter. The vultures were dying, and no one knew why. The mystery deepened even further, but then scientists performing autopsies on the dead vultures began to find a clue. A strange, chalky white substances coating birds' internal organ. And what was this telltale sign? And what tiny, unsuspecting villain did it point to? That's coming up next. That chalky white substances was a sign of a visceral gout. In simple terms, catastrophic kidney failure. The vulture's kidneys were shutting down, poisoning them from inside. This was a huge breakthrough. Now the question wasn't just what's killing the vulture, but what's causing mass kidney failures in vulture across the entire subcontinent. The science detectives, led by researchers from organizations like the Peregrine Fund and India's own Bombay Natural History Society (BNHS), started looking at what vultures ate. Their main food source, the carcasses of domestic livestock, especially cattle. So the question became, was there something in the cattle that was poison to vulture? They began testing tissue samples from the dead cattle and dead vultures, and after meticulous, painstaking work, they found it. The culprit, the murder weapon, it wasn't pesticide, it wasn't virus, it was a painkiller. Yeah, a common, cheap, and a very effective veterinary drug called diclofenac. It's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, an NSAID, used widely by vets across the India to treat pain and inflammation in livestock. A sick cow, an injured buffalo, it was harmless to the cattle. But when a vulture ate the carcasses of an animal that had been treated with diclofenac, shortly before its death, even tiny amounts of drug remaining in the tissue were lethally toxic to the bird. It shut down their kidneys. Therefore, this seemingly helpful medicine, used with the good intentions by vets and farmers, was the silent killer responsible for the greatest bird population crash in recorded history, an ecological trap of devastating proportions. It was shocking revelations. A simple painkiller had brought an entire ecosystem to its knees. The mystery was solved, the culprit was identified, but the damage was already done. So what were the cascading consequences of a sky empty of vultures? And how could India possibly reverse this catastrophic decline? That's coming up next. With nature's cleanup crew almost entirely gone, the consequences were grim and immediate. Uneaten animal carcasses were left rotting in the field for much longer. This led to the huge boom in population of stray dogs and rats. More dogs and rats feeding on potentially diseased carcasses meant a much higher risks like rabies and anthrax spreading to the human population. Public health was at risk, and for the Parsi community, the loss of vulture created a profound cultural crisis, disrupting their centuries-old tradition of sky burials. The absence of this one bird was causing ripples of chaos through ecology and culture. The solution, now that the cause was known, was clear, though not easy. In 2006, the government of India, along with Nepal and Pakistan, took a landmark step. They banned the use of the diclofenac. A safer alternative drug called as meloxicam was identified and promoted. But banning a drug is one thing. Getting it out of circulation is completely another. And what about the few vultures that were left? Well, to save them, ambitious captive breeding programs were started. Vulture restaurants or safe feeding zones were created, where carcasses known to be free of the drug were left out for the remaining wild bird. It was a massive conservation effort, a race against the time to save this crucial species from being completely wiped out. So a ban was put in place, breeding centers were built, but has it worked? And what does this whole chilling episode of this ecological Chernobyl really teach us? That's coming up next. So where are we today? Well, the good news is the ban on diclofenac had a positive effect. The vulture population decline had slowed down, and in some areas it even stabilized or shown a small signs of recovery. The captive breeding programs have had success and are starting to release birds back into the wild. But the road back is incredibly long. It will take decades for the populations to recover even a fraction of their former numbers. The threat isn't entirely gone. The diclofenac, which is used on humans, is sometimes still illegally used on cattle. The legacy of the vulture's vanishing act is a powerful and frankly a humbling one. It's a stark reminder that the intricate, often invisible connections that hold our ecosystem together. Who would have thought that a painkiller for a cow could lead a public health crisis and silence the skies? It teaches us that every action we take, every chemical we introduce into the environment can have unintended consequences that ripple out in a ways that we can't even predict. It's a story about the importance of science as a detective tool, the dedication of the researchers who refused to give up until they found the culprit, and ultimately it's a story of hope. It shows that when science and the government policy and the conservation action come together, it is possible to pull a species back from the brink. The sight of a vulture circling in the sky is still a rare one in many parts of India, but it's no longer a sign of impending doom, but perhaps a fragile symbol of a hard-won second chances. And speaking of magnificent birds and their relationship with us, next time on Simply Wild, from crisis of the modern age, we ride back into the military history. Next time we explore how the fate of the great Indian kingdoms rested not on the shoulder of kings, no, but on the powerful backs of their horses. From a silent sky to a story of scientific discovery and hope, the Vultures' vanishing act is a powerful modern tale. There's always more to explore, but that's our expedition for today. Keep exploring, keep wondering. If you enjoyed the story, make sure you hit follow or subscribe on whatever app you are using so you don't miss our next expedition, and keep it simply wild, dosto. Until next time, this is your host Mansab, signing off. And hey, if you have a spare 30 seconds, leaving a rating or a review on a Spotify or Apple podcast is the single best way to help new listeners discover this show. It would mean world to me, and thank you for listening.